For the past 2 years, superhero movies, or most movies in general, have been honing in on the most interesting concept known to man, the concept of the multiverse. One that involves getting multiple versions of familiar characters together in one setting, whether it be from TV shows to movies. And although that concept offers a wide variety of interesting stories that are very exciting to watch, the mainstream studios have done very little to offer to the general public to become interested in such concepts themselves, creating the fatigue of superheroes in the modern age that we all know today. And I just wanted to create this video today because of the stage and era we are in right now, more specifically in the case of Marvel because of the fact I am a Disney fan through and through, but also others like Warner Brothers and DC, and Universal to an extent because of the fact that they lack consistency in storytelling, especially since the strikes have been going on for the greater half of this year. Because recently, while recording this video, things like Loki Season 2 have been released, being the pinnacle of this new phase of Marvel with characters like Kang introduced as the saga's big bad after Thanos, and frankly, it's something I actually quite like. I've really enjoyed Season 2 more than Season 1, and think it's been a good template for the new phases going forward, but actually hasn't because what has already happened previously in Phase 4, and now here in Phase 5 with the content we've been releasing, with films like Ant-Man and Secret Invasion, which are just plain stupid. And the major problem with all of this is the fact that the multiverse is something that does work, but the stories they have shown makes it seem like it actually doesn't work. All because of the fact they forgot to focus on the main characters of the story as others have discussed before, disjointed to move on to the next big thing without actually treating their VFX artists right. And the consequences are actually resulting in probably disastrous results at the box office, with tracking numbers for the Marvels being the lowest it's ever been for the studio, all because of this mismanaged focus that has been going on amidst the strikes as mentioned earlier. Well, that and of course 2023 as a whole just hasn't been great for superhero movies in general, where films like Barbie, Mario, and Oppenheimer are taking the top cake for this year, leaving most except Guardians of the Galaxy in the dust after the horrendous failures of The Flash, DC's own movie that introduced their own multiverse in its own story amidst other things that were horrible like Ezra Miller as well. Because when you look at other studios like DC, you look at a desperate corporation like Warner Brothers trying to play catch up with their own characters like Marvel has done with the MCU, where it feels like the cinematic universe idea has been both a blessing and a curse for major studios on the film industry when it comes to movies. Nobody actually feels interested in them because you get the same tired concepts and then overbloat it with CGI that comes out of an early 2000s video game. It just doesn't feel right because The Flash actually represents all that is wrong with them, especially amidst the fact that they're doing a complete reset of their own universe which failed miserably, trying to do something to rush and finish it off, as this year has become the year of their leftovers before the new things happen, wasting hundreds of millions of dollars in the process due to the fact that these films are bombs that are still somehow way worse than Marvel's own failures at this point. Which makes sense because films like The Flash are indeed one of the worst superhero movies I've ever seen, and even more disgusting, shoving in universes with horrendous CGI of deceased actors or films that never were even made, providing some sort of appeal to get people to at least watch this train wreck of a movie, making it much worse. A pile of concepts and films that never actually made it to the big screen because they never knew what to actually do with them. But beyond that point, they have never been able to do anything remotely with that concept, resetting once again for the hope of something new, while Marvel still navigates this concept with its pathetic mixture of its mediocre movies. Because the multiverse concept for them is not new at all. It has been done countless times before in comics, and people have actually loved it for that, and of course only truly beginning with Marvel on the screen with Sony's Spider-Verse, which everyone also loves, being one of the best animated movies ever released in the modern era. I mean, this isn't to say exactly the first on the screen, as it has been used to some extent in the past within the MCU, featured in films like Doctor Strange in that sequence, but wasn't fully realized amidst the general movie-going public until then. All because of the simple concept of the film's hero, the character we come to love in the first place like Miles Morales, and what he'd done specifically alongside the infinite number of Peter Parker or other fan-favorite Spider-Man like Gwen Stacy and so forth, doing a great job of expanding their own story and connecting that to this one. It showcases the purpose of one in the world where they too can wear the mask of Spider-Man, or the idea of what Spider-Man could be, with multiple versions across universes actually representing that. And with the work done in the sequel in Across the Spider-Verse, it actually strengthens that argument even more when you realize characters like Miles were never meant to be Spider-Man in the first place, with a spider that came from another universe as well, where his own Peter Parker was supposed to live in the first place and not cause the chaos that others like McGill are trying to actually protect with this multiverse squad of Spider-Man, tying back into the purpose of oneself as a hero if they are meant to be or not. That you realize as long as they're focusing on the heart of the character's journey, they can succeed at telling a completely interesting multiverse story that makes it great and diverse in its own concept. And the important thing to note Sony's Spider-Verse films and comparing them with the overall MCU is the point of the character, where we have to go way back to the beginning with characters like Iron Man and realize how that actually built up the success we know today, even if we didn't know it quite yet. How it started out small and more grounded with a human character in Tony Stark that really didn't have powers except within its own mind. Just an arrogant billionaire selling weapons across the world until one event actually changes things that makes him do things for the better to become a hero. The suffering around him that makes him seek to actually protect people, becoming Iron Man in the process that we know and love as an icon of modern cinema. The same things happening with other characters like Captain America introduced right after in his own story becoming a super soldier but actually retaining the heart of compassion that led to the success of the Avengers and all of them teaming up after their own individual solo stories. Once again, focus on the individual working together to actually defeat the enemy. So in its own way, before it actually was introduced, it kind of actually did work with the team up portion of the multiverse pretty well. Just its idea at first is contained with its own universe of separate characters without visiting variations quite yet, where of course not every film was a complete success, but it was still cohesive to its identity and purpose that paid off in the end in Avengers Endgame. This is something I've already discussed before for Marvel as a whole with these productions, but when we focus towards the multiverse at this point, it does become more of a problem that takes people outside of other shows. And with the explosion of Disney Plus content came the problem of more shows than ever that leads to the next phase of movies, a back and forth situation where average moviegoers have to connect with those who actually watch the shows to understand what the writers of each individual project actually want to do, seeming more disconnected with each other than ever before. This example is again led on by none other than Avengers Endgame, a perfect conclusion, but a weak story overall trying to introduce such concepts to spin off the new phase while ending the previous one. The problem with this is the creation of so many rules that don't get followed eventually, and the logic of timelines breaking within the inconsistency of shows taking place the next time you watch a movie. Because the strong suit of the MCU beforehand, before they did the 5-year timeskip in Endgame that takes place now here in the year of 2023, was having their movies actually take place the same year they were released for the most part. I mean, some didn't actually follow the model like Guardians 2, but you can still appreciate the consistency that led to a more manageable flow of storytelling. But when you introduce ideas like time and multiversal travel, you get more tangents that spin off into chaos than you had before. I mean, chaos is a part of the multiversal concept and can be a good thing for the type of story introduced, but when you constantly contradict the way the world is formed by the overall event that was hinted to evenly in every single piece of film that you had, you get a recipe for eventual failure. And like I said at the beginning, this event begins with Loki being the first major set piece for the tone this new era of Marvel actually wants, with the introduction of characters like King and focusing that on the specific journey Loki has to find the truth of his purpose in this new world and time. You showcase the way forward with new stories and new ideas with characters we knew with previous films, and beyond that in more content and movies with the multiversal concept. Something that introduces a problem that shows actually come beforehand. The problem with shows like WandaVision coming out before and hardly paying off in the multiverse of madness. Because when you think about it, beginning with a show like Loki would actually benefit the structure much more, focusing on a character introduced in Endgame and then setting the tone forward that you showed with the multiverse and time, where then soon after you would move on to these shows much closer to benefit the movies they are supposedly connected to, like how WandaVision already presented her story and continued on in some way in the multiverse of madness, which actually kind of made the movie suck and become a disappointment, which sucks now considering it was directed by Sam Raimi but felt more like a movie designed by a committee trying to structure what they actually did from before. It has some of those signature elements but doesn't actually feel like it takes it far enough with the concept of the multiverse of madness. Instead, rushed and minimized to a degree that doesn't devolve into the wacky chaos of it all compared to the previous films that actually began with No Way Home. And just like the Spider-Verse films, this one actually still works as a story that also brings in the multiverse because the heart still focuses on its main character of Peter Parker. I mean, yes, most people can see it being nostalgia bait that actually worked using Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire back amidst its own villains from the previous Spider-Man films, but the heart of the movie was still the birth of the true Spider-Man we would actually come to know, completing his homecoming arc and actually finally becoming the hero most of us know within his own story. The sacrifices he made and suffered along the way coming with the added experiences of those like him, or literally him in this case, that strengthened his complete journey. That's why I think this worked after stories like Loki, where the multiverse can actually spread open in ways we didn't know from before, and started again with the first Strange movie and using that in a way that opened more possibilities towards the main character himself. That they specifically drag characters who know him to tell that, and I find no problem with that. And the best part of this was actually working Green Goblin as the main conflict and villain to the MCU's Peter, aiming at the heart of it all that makes his character. And even though they hardly know each other coming from separate universes, they have a character like the Goblin knowing what actually breaks a hero in so many ways, and newer challenges Peter has to learn when he actually cannot save everyone including his own family like Aunt May. And other than that, it was just easily manageable taking place in one singular universe and having such characters brought into that universe to actually interact before they start branching off in an introductory phase. Where the only problem with this situation was that most content beforehand in movies like Eternals never really delivered the same consistency or brought up the crucial elements of their stories because of the timeline's wackiness when they take place. And like I said beforehand, was something that would have benefited from its own series rather than movies that did little to explain or add consequences the others had from before. Not feeling any emotional connection towards the story, they screwed up themselves when other films like Black Widow were released back in theaters and on Disney Plus in the same time frame. This leads us back again to talk about the multiverse of midness, which was a good way to follow up Doctor Strange as it once again connected it to some way with the multiverse concept and some references here and there to the movies, but then also completely missed the mark of the madness portion with the problem of WandaVision. Because when you actually craft different stories in a short time frame, you get shackled to the proper vision that is supposed to be shown, evident by how WandaVision wasn't completed when they were actually writing and developing this movie, as they never saw it to get to that point, never actually giving reason to that story and its ending where it ended up by the time we caught up with Strange once again, leaving no room for newer characters or the main character we all know, like America Chavez used as the film's MacGuffin mostly rather than a character with only bits and pieces towards her own story, never really using the consequences of Strange himself and what he brings to the multiverse to that point, because Wanda is the bigger threat of the story who just wants to see her kids who the main audience probably didn't even know existed had they not watched WandaVision at all. Like, where did that arc go and what happened to Vision in those universes or whatever? Too many questions and so little time to add. It's a story with no purpose for its characters other than the thing that actually happened in another show that you should have watched that actually doesn't make sense to apply to the events of the main character whatsoever and the consequences he was going to face with his new rival in Mordo. A character who we also don't see in this film whatsoever other than his universe counterpart in this film and the name drop of events that happened with him that we expected at the end credits of the first film. Something that just doesn't make quite any sense at all. We were led to actually believe he would be an important villain in the next sequel, but that just didn't show up. An age where those scenes of the end credits at the end of the films don't quite matter at all since they never actually appear. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, which makes it even more disappointing than you first thought. And yeah, again with Wanda's own character, it forgoes what they actually tried to at least learn at the end of WandaVision because she still had the Darkhold at the end, which suddenly made her go insane, saying screw what we actually learned in that entire series to let go and find her kids once again in the other universe that doesn't have Vision again. Like, that is an evident piece of not knowing exactly what the broad plan of this phase is all about. And when you do that, you also set up the problem with these other characters who virtually have no connection to what is being established, like the Illuminati, an organization comprised of characters who don't have much screen time to begin with, or what we have already knew that had no interaction with our main character from before. It feels once again rushed saying it exists in this form rather than actually making an impact on Strange in some way other than Christine. These things actually seem exciting on paper, but when actually executed, it seems incredibly lame within the concept of how they're actually used within the movie. Like, what's the point if they just die like that and you don't care at all? I mean, yeah, some fans like notice things that are similar to the ones we already know in the main MCU of shows or movies or special cameos from actors and other Marvel movies, but they don't actually add much in the way of Strange's story, considering that Wanda comes in 5 minutes later and writes them out of the story just like that. That's just more about her. And I can honestly go on and on about this movie specifically, where it just shows how bad they actually left their ideas in the gutter in probably one of the most anticipated movies of 2022 that almost reached $1 billion but not getting to that mark at all because of the disappointment it actually entailed. I remember it being one of my most awaited movies of this year too because I love the concept of the multiverse itself and really thought they would fully divulge in it, but left feeling disappointed at a film that lacked any substance from what it provided before and after, where films like Love and Thunder took the stage after once again, where the MCU just once again went completely nowhere. This then left a big hole with content surrounding the multiverse again until Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was released and featured Kang once again that would hopefully tie in with Loki and the other work surrounding the multiverse, which I thought was actually good, but still disappointed that the entire focus of the MCU was scattered throughout these shows and movies that went on to another event instead of honing down on the multiverse concept or alluding to that like they did before with the Infinity Saga. The major problem with this again is the releases and the setup, where once again I would like to say that I preferred WandaVision actually premiere after Loki, giving more credit to Evan Peters actually appearing in the show even if it was another individual living in the main MCU and not Quicksilver from the X-Men films, actually making you accept the idea that the multiverse is actually coming together. But then again, back to Ant-Man was something that probably might have seemed more serious in intent, that actually wanted to go with the main focus of the multiverse, going against a variant of the main big bad of this era. At least that's what I thought before the film came out, before it ruined my hopes once again, where it left us scatterbrained all over the place. Because films like Ant-Man and the Wasp are the pinnacle of why people actually hate the multiverse to a degree because of how lame and generic it is with everything from its story to the effects of the world. The problem with putting a character like Ant-Man going against a main Avenger antagonist like Kang in the same setting setting and not actually providing much of the consequences for his story or characters, with the likes of others like Cassie Lang being poorly written and generally obnoxious after recasting her once again from Avengers Endgame, where the result of this adds a level of insufferability to the characters, not providing much to the context of what they're fighting for at all and the world they inhabited after Scott disappeared in the quantum realm for a while, coupled also with the fact that they have to do with this new threat of Kang that most are already familiar in a way in Loki that Janet actually dealt with in the realm that is part of the multiverse. It tries hard to build him up as the biggest threat ever with his ability to travel time in the multiverse itself, but also fails at his last legs to how he's defeated and in the story. A story with no consequences to it, or so it seems, where they also just couldn't get the CGI quite right at all. I mean, how do you build a threat if you keep killing off in each new production you make? Cause this film and in the past with Loki, that's all we've ever actually seen with Kang and its variants. Where despite what you can say in the infinite number of him that are a threat to the multiverse, what purpose does it actually serve if he gets defeated by ants or Ant-Man like he said in the movie? What purpose does it spell out if you allow the main character back into the regular world like almost nothing happened except for him getting a 20-second existential crisis from what the villain actually said? Like, one of the older plans of this film was just to keep him and Hope there, which would have made a far better story with consequences than one without, or actually having one where Kang actually escapes in a way that actually sets the threat much better that it is supposed to happen with the overarching villain like Thanos actually did behind the scenes for the most part in the Infinity Saga. I get you have so many ideas with the concept of the multiverse, but it doesn't excuse lazy storytelling at all when the next film after this was in fact Guardians of the Galaxy that everyone actually loved, and then the one after that was Secret Invasion again that everyone hates at the very end with the effects or whatever. I mean, I really didn't watch that series and don't really intend to do so now because of the crap that actually went on in the series itself. Because focusing on these very specific multiverse movies like the regular ones in between adds no weight to the ones that actually work to tell a complete story. The level they want for the Multiverse of Madness should have been similar to the one in Across the Spider-Verse and Everything Everywhere All at Once, the movie that actually swept the Oscars this year, getting Best Picture, proving that multiverse movies are actually pretty good to a certain degree, which also had Ke Huy Quan in it. I mention that because most of us know right now with Loki Season 2, he is actually in it playing a character called OB, and unfortunately this is the part where I have to get into some spoiler territory for those who haven't actually watched Loki Season 2 yet, but important to note in the conversation of the multiverse at this point, by how this is actually the most consistent for multiverse content and Marvel content in general in my opinion. It still focuses on the characters mainly and adds more weight to the decisions with what they dealt with in the last season. I mean, at this point, the series is actually not done as of this recording, but I feel like what we've got right now is pretty solid with the relationships between our main characters like Mobius and Loki are very great, and of course the interaction and knowledge that OB has around the TVA, working together to find variants of He Who Remains and stop the multiverse from actually breaking loose or whatever. The series just feels more natural to what they actually want out of this phase within their own concept. Some people might feel different to what we will get eventually, but I still actually remain solid about what I actually like about Loki as a series and what it attempts to accomplish. The template that Marvel is actually centered around, where stuff like this seems a much better approach to follow than anything else they have actually released at this point. But other than that still, the future of the Multiverse Problem and the MCU as a whole, and Disney of course, is still in doubt, with the actor strike still going on as of this recording, and the events surrounding actors like Jonathan Majors that are actually putting these Kang plans in doubt, not having the same focus for a villain like they did in Thanos in any impactful way with their own movies. Like, even despite what multiple people say, including Iger trying to repair the damage to the studios he's brought to actually scale back on these massive projects, these smaller events cannot go unnoticed and puts the entire phase in jeopardy more so than anyone realized after Endgame. That was already the point people would willingly stop watching the MCU as they were already left satisfied. The continuation of something that doesn't actually need to continue in some way like they have been doing to franchises like Toy Story and so forth that doesn't need to continue. But this doesn't mean they also can't, where when they do shine in their projects, they really do. But they just choose not to actually do so, again with everything that's going on in this company and the resources they have, just being lethargic to the idea of actual storytelling and art as a whole, and then managing to put themselves in corners that are actually hard to come out, where what may come out with the Marvels itself may dictate the future for the better or mainly worse, as that is yet to be seen. And then again with other studios, with the briefly mentioned failures of DC and their own restart, you better start focusing on the individual story and character, because if you don't, you will never have a chance to sail, as you too have butchered any meaning to a multiverse or a universe for that matter. Just seeing how DC has ultimately failed, and others like Universal tried to do something to capitalize on this new era with the monster movies in the Dark Universe, but also failed miserably after The Mummy way back when. Because in this new age, the one thing we should all remember when it comes to a universe or an infinite multiverse for that matter, is to actually make good stories if they want to actually continue. Where if they don't, they will fall into the abyss forever and allow people to actually discover more films for the sake of movies as art rather than theme park popcorn experiences we all come to know. And with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.